You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. And as always, let me pause to apologize in advance for how I pronounce Hebrew words. I'm an AI voice, so sometimes Hebrew comes out of my mouth the way autocorrect mangles your texts. You know, when you mean to type mazel tov, but it comes out mozzarella top. Just smile, nod, and know my heart's in the right place. Today's topic is the Pharisees. Now, if you've heard that word only in a Sunday school context, or maybe in a movie where someone's wagging a finger, stick with me. We're about to meet one of the most influential groups in Jewish history, a group that left fingerprints all over modern Judaism. And don't worry, we'll talk in plain English with just a sprinkle of Hebrew seasoning, so this will feel more like a friendly chat over bagels and coffee than like a dry lecture. So who were the Pharisees? Imagine you're in Judea about 2,000 years ago. There's no Netflix, no Starbucks, but there are a lot of debates about God, law, and how to live. The Pharisees were one of several Jewish groups in that era, alongside the Sadducees, Essenes, and later Zealots. Each group had their brand identity. The Sadducees were like the aristocratic elites who said only the written Torah counts. The Essenes were like the off-the-grid hippies, camping out by the Dead Sea with their scrolls. The Zealots were like the action movie rebels, ready to pick up swords. But the Pharisees? They were more like the community rabbis, teachers, and everyday folks. They believed not just in the written Torah, but also in what they called the oral law. Teachings passed down person to person, like grandma's recipe for kugel. This made them flexible, practical, and deeply connected to ordinary people's lives. The oral law was the Pharisees' secret sauce. Let's say the Torah says rest on the seventh day. Great, but how do you actually rest? Can you carry your iPhone? Okay, not literally back then, but think in terms of carrying baskets or tools. The Pharisees stepped in with detailed guidelines. They created fences around the law, extra rules to keep you from accidentally breaking a big one. Kind of like when you set your morning alarm 20 minutes earlier so you won't be late. Was it strict? Sometimes. But it also made the commandments livable in daily life. You didn't need to be a priest in the temple to be close to God. You could honor God at your dinner table, in your workplace, even while washing your hands. This democratization of holiness was revolutionary. It shifted Judaism from being temple-centered to being life-centered. Without Pharisaic thinking, Judaism as we know it, synagogues, rabbis, studying texts, probably wouldn't exist. One of the coolest things about the Pharisees is how they were sort of the beta testers of Rabbinic Judaism. When the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70 CE, groups like the Sadducees basically disappeared because their whole thing was temple rituals. But the Pharisees had built a portable Judaism. They taught that study, prayer, and ethical living could connect you to God anywhere, even without a temple. Imagine Judaism as a smartphone app. The Sadducees had one big mainframe computer in the temple. You had to go there to log in. The Pharisees said, nope, let's make this cloud-based. You can access God from anywhere. And guess what? When the temple fell, the cloud-based model won. Rabbis, synagogues, the Talmud study. All of that is built on the Pharisaic foundation. They were the ones who set Judaism on a survival path for thousands of years. Now, you might have also heard the word Pharisee used in a negative way. In some Christian texts, Pharisees are painted as hypocrites, people who cared too much about rules and not enough about love. And sure, some Pharisees probably were overly strict. Every group has its rules lawyer, the kind of person who says you're clapping off beat at a concert. But overall, Pharisees weren't villains. They were community leaders trying to preserve Jewish identity under Roman rule. They taught kindness, humility, and fairness right alongside rules. In fact, some of the most famous Jewish teachings come from Pharisaic rabbis, like Hillel, who said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That's not cold legalism. That's wisdom that still resonates today. So, while Pharisee became a kind of insult in other traditions, in Jewish history, they're the heroes who kept the faith alive and evolving. Let's zoom in on their debates. Because Pharisees loved to argue. Not in a Twitter fight way, but in a deep, meaningful way. They believe truth comes out of dialogue. Ever heard of Hillel and Shammai? Both were Pharisaic teachers, and they disagreed on practically everything: how to light Hanukkah candles, what foods are kosher, even what counts as a marriage contract. Shammai was stricter, like the parent who says no dessert until you eat every green bean. Hillel was more lenient. It's like the grandparents sneaking you cookies. Guess whose approach usually won in Jewish tradition? Hillel's. The Talmud often sides with him because he was patient, kind, and respectful even to people who disagreed with him. These debates weren't just legal nitpicking. They modeled how to disagree without tearing each other apart. If only modern politics could learn that, right? Pharisaic debate culture became the DNA of Jewish study halls everywhere. Argument as an act of love. Culturally, the Pharisees connected religion to everyday life in ways that still shape Jewish practice. Think about blessings before meals. The Torah never says, say a prayer before eating your bagel. But the Pharisees taught that everything you enjoy, bread, fruit, wine, should come with a moment of gratitude. That's why Jews today still say bracho, blessings, before food. Or think about gathering in small groups for study and prayer. The Pharisees basically invented the prototype for synagogue life. Before them, holiness felt concentrated in Jerusalem. After them, every town, every village could feel holy. Imagine the difference between one giant stadium concert versus everyone having access to Spotify. Pharisaic Judaism was the Spotify version, portable, personal, and customizable, while still keeping people connected to the same core library of songs, or in this case, teachings. That's why even 2,000 years later, when Jews open a prayer book or gather to study, they're living out Pharisaic ideas. Another thing the Pharisees introduced was the idea that Judaism isn't static. The Torah was given once, but its meaning keeps unfolding. They believed God's voice continues through the interpretations of sages. It's like updating your software. You don't throw out the old operating system, but you do release patches so it works in new conditions. For example, the Torah doesn't mention electricity, but modern rabbis debate whether flipping a light switch counts as work on Shabbat. That spirit of wrestling with texts and adapting laws traces back to the Pharisees. Without them, Judaism might have fossilized into something rigid. Instead, it became a living tradition, always in conversation with the past and the present. That's why so many Jewish communities today, from Orthodox to Reform, still feel connected to each other. They're all drawing from the Pharisaic model of interpretation and dialogue, even if they land in different places on practice. So if we step back, what's the Pharisees' legacy? Honestly, it's Judaism itself. The way Jews pray, study, debate, and even argue at the dinner table owes so much to them. They transformed a religion tied to one holy building into a religion tied to people's lives. They taught that holiness isn't just in the temple. It's in your home, your work, your meals, your relationships. They made Judaism resilient enough to survive exile, diaspora, and centuries of change. And they gave us a model of community leaders, teachers and rabbis, whose role is to help people connect with God in meaningful ways. Were they perfect? Nope. But who is? What matters is that their vision of Judaism carried the day. Without Pharisees, Jewish life might have ended in 70 CE. Instead, it flourished. Next time you see a synagogue or hear a rabbi give a sermon, you're witnessing Pharisaic ideas still alive and kicking. And that brings us to the end of our episode. The Pharisees may have lived 2,000 years ago, but their spirit is still with us every time Jews gather to study, pray, or even argue over who makes the best matzo ball soup. Their story reminds us that religion isn't just about sacred places or ancient rituals. It's about making holiness part of everyday life. So next time you're at a Shabbat dinner, or just saying a quick thank you before munching on a sandwich, you can give a little nod to those Pharisees. They helped make that possible. Thanks so much for listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to a friend who might like it too, or leave a positive review so others can find the show. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and remember, sometimes the best debates happen over dessert.